My son started assigning roles in my restaurant while I was still sitting at the table. I remember that night down to the smallest detail. Warm lighting, plates clinking, the smell of basil, and his voice, calm, confident. You handle suppliers. You take care of staff. Mom needs to rest a little. He didn't even look at me, like I wasn't there anymore. I sat with a cup of coffee I wasn't drinking, just listening. Listening to them divide my business, the one I built over 40 years, like I was already out of it. No one pushed back, not even my daughter. She just nodded and said, "Yeah, this will be easier." Easier for who? I didn't interrupt, didn't raise my voice, didn't remind them whose name is on every contract. I just watched and listened. Because in that moment, something clicked. They didn't see it as mine anymore. And the worst part? Not even that. The worst part was, they acted like this had already happened. Like I was just late to notice. And once I understood that, I stopped reacting as a mother and started thinking like an owner.
Welcome to Life Voices, where family drama turns into late-life justice. Subscribe for more emotional family stories. Tell me in the comments where you're watching from.
I built that business from nothing. Not helped, not inherited, built. One location, 12 tables, a leaking ceiling I couldn't afford to fix for 6 months. I used to come in before sunrise, chop vegetables myself, wipe every surface twice, count every dollar at night like it was oxygen. Because back then, it was. My husband was still alive then. He used to stand by the door and say, "You don't run a restaurant. You run a system." And he was right. Every supplier, every lease, every employee schedule, I knew everything, not because I had to, because I cared. When the second location opened, my son was still in college. He used to sit at the corner table, doing homework while I closed out the register. "Mom, one day I'll help you expand this," he said once. I believed him. I believed all of them. I paid for their education, their weddings, their homes. When my eldest daughter needed money for her temporary situation, I wired it the same day. No questions, because that's what family does, right? You build something, and then you share it. I never kept score, never wrote anything down. I thought loyalty worked both ways. I was wrong. Looking back now, the shift didn't happen overnight. It was subtle, so quiet I almost respected it. At first, it sounded like concern. "Mom, you've done enough. You should slow down. You don't need to be involved in everything." They said it gently, like they were protecting me. But I remember the first time I wasn't copied on an email. It was small, a supplier change, something I would normally approve. I asked about it later. My son smiled. "We handled it. It's fine." Handled it. That word stayed with me. Then came the meetings I didn't need to attend. The decisions already made. The updates instead of discussions. And always the same tone. Soft, polite, final. At family dinners, the conversations changed too. They stopped asking me questions. Started informing me instead. "We're thinking of restructuring. We might bring in outside management. We should optimize operations." Big words. Clean words. Words that sound responsible, until you realize what they're really saying. I remember sitting at the table one night, listening to them talk about long-term control. Control. That one wasn't soft. That one slipped out. My daughter-in-law noticed. She quickly smiled and added, "I mean, stability." Stability. I nodded. But inside, something didn't sit right. Because I had built stability. Brick by brick. Contract by contract. Year after year. And suddenly, they were talking about it like it was something new. Something they were creating, without me. Still, I didn't confront them. Not yet. Because part of me kept thinking, maybe I'm overreacting. Maybe this is just how things evolve. Maybe this is what letting go looks like. But deep down, I knew the difference between being supported and being replaced. And what I was feeling, it didn't feel like support. And then there were the small things. The kind most people wouldn't even notice. Passwords changed, not locked, just updated. Security reasons, my son said. Of course. Access levels adjusted, just to simplify things. Of course. Staff started coming to them first. Not because I told them to. Because someone else did. I could feel it shifting. Not loudly, not aggressively, quietly, like furniture being moved in a room while you're still sitting in it. And no one asking if you're comfortable. One afternoon, I walked into my own office, and my chair was different. Same desk, same view, different chair. I stood there longer than I should have. Ran my hand over the leather. It wasn't mine. No one said anything. No one explained. But that's when I understood something I couldn't ignore anymore. They weren't preparing to help me. They were preparing to function without me. And they were getting very comfortable doing it. It didn't stop. That's the part people don't understand. Things like this don't explode. They slide. One quiet decision at a time. One small improvement. One, we've got it. Until one day, you look around and realize you're still in the room, but nothing in it belongs to you anymore. A week after that dinner, my daughter-in-law started coming in more often. Not as a guest, not as family, as if she had a role. She would walk through the kitchen slowly, arms crossed, watching. Not helping, evaluating. I noticed the staff straightening up when she passed. Not out of respect, out of uncertainty. That told me everything. One afternoon, I heard her voice from the hallway. Low, controlled. We need consistency. Right now it still feels like her place. Her, not your mother, not my name, just her. I didn't step out. I stayed where I was and listened. My younger son answered, "It'll take time. You can't just switch everything overnight." Switch everything. I remember closing my eyes for a second. Just 1 second, because something inside me settled. Not broke, settled, like a glass finally hitting the table after shaking too long. That's when I stopped needing explanations. They weren't confused. They weren't figuring things out. They were executing something, quietly, carefully, together. That same week, I was accidentally left out of a meeting with our main landlord. 20 years I'd handled that relationship myself. 20, and suddenly, "Oh, we thought you didn't want to deal with it." I smiled. Of course, of course. That phrase started living in my mouth. It was easier than asking questions I already knew the answers to. Then came the numbers. Reports started arriving, simplified. Too simplified, rounded, clean, missing detail. When I asked for full breakdowns, my daughter said, "Mom, you don't need to go that deep anymore." Anymore. I nodded again. Of course. But that night, I opened my laptop. Not the office one, my own. The one no one knew I still used. And I pulled up the old system. The original structure. The one I built. Everything was still there. Every transaction. Every pattern. Every shift. And that's when I saw it. Not theft. Not yet. Something else. Reallocation. Control points moving. Access narrowing. Decision chains shortening. But not toward me. Away from me. I leaned back in my chair and just looked at the screen. For a long time. Because now it was clear. This wasn't about helping me. This wasn't about easing my workload. This was positioning. Careful. Strategic. Quiet positioning. And the most interesting part? They thought I didn't see it. They thought I was stepping back. Getting tired. Letting go. That was the story they were telling themselves. And maybe, that's the story they needed. Because I didn't correct them. I didn't walk into the next meeting. Didn't demand access. Didn't remind anyone whose name was on the ownership structure. I did something else instead. I watched. Closer than ever. Listened without reacting. Noted every shift. Every decision. Every name that started appearing more often than before. They thought silence meant weakness. It doesn't. Silence gives you time. And I was starting to understand exactly how much of it I had left. And how I was going to use it. The break didn't come with shouting. It came with a sentence. Soft, careful, measured. I almost missed it. We were at the main location. Late afternoon, not busy yet. My daughter-in-law was standing near the bar, flipping through a printed report like she owned the numbers. My eldest son leaned closer to her and said, just above a whisper, "We just need to slowly move her out." That was it. No anger, no hesitation, no guilt. Just a plan, already in motion. I didn't move, didn't breathe. For a second, I thought maybe I misunderstood. But then she nodded, calm, certain. Exactly. No confrontation. It'll be easier for everyone. Easier. That word again. I turned slightly, just enough to see their reflection in the glass behind the bottles. They looked comfortable, like people discussing furniture placement. Not a person, not their mother, not the woman who built everything around them. Just a step in a process. And in that moment, something inside me became very clear. I wasn't a mother anymore. I was a position. A role they were preparing to replace. And the strangest part? I didn't feel anger. Not right away. I felt distance. Like I had stepped outside of my own life and was watching it happen to someone else. I picked up my bag. Walked past them. Slowly. They stopped talking. Of course they did. Heading out? My son asked. His voice was normal. Almost warm. I looked at him. Really looked. Trying to find the boy who used to sit at my counter doing homework. He wasn't there. Just for today, I said. And I left. No scene. No questions. No explanation. That's when I stopped explaining myself. Completely. That night, I didn't call anyone. Didn't replay the conversation out loud. Didn't cry. I sat in my living room, lights off, and let the silence settle around me. Because once you hear the truth like that, you can't unhear it. And once you see your place clearly, you stop trying to defend it. You start thinking differently, not like a mother, like an owner, like someone who understands structure, leverage, timing. I went over everything in my head, not emotionally, logically, what they had, what they thought they had, and what actually existed, because there's always a difference. Always. By the time I stood up from that chair, I wasn't confused anymore. I wasn't hurt. I was focused. They thought they were slowly moving me out. What they didn't understand was that I had never stopped being in control. They just stopped seeing how. I went to my office. Not the one at the restaurant. The one in my house. The one no one thought about anymore. Old desk. Paper files. Backup records. The real structure. I opened the cabinet and pulled out the original folders. Ownership. Holding entities. Lease agreements. Signatory rights. Things people forget when they get comfortable. I sat down and started reading. Slowly, carefully, line by line, because memory is one thing. Documents are another, and I trusted paper more than I trusted people. What they were managing was only the surface, operations, staff, daily flow, but control? Control lived deeper, in signatures, in structures, in places they had never looked. And the more I read, the clearer it became. They weren't taking my business. They were taking a version of it. A layer. Something I allowed them to touch. And that realization? It changed everything. Because now I wasn't reacting anymore. I was preparing. Quietly. The same way they thought they were. Only difference? I knew exactly what I was doing. And they still thought I didn't notice anything. The next morning, I didn't change anything. That was important. No sudden moves. No new rules. No reactions. I showed up exactly the same. Same time. Same table. Same coffee. Because the most dangerous thing you can do is let people know you've seen them clearly. And I wasn't ready for that yet. My son walked in 10 minutes late. Kissed me on the cheek. Morning, Mom. Like nothing had shifted. Like I hadn't heard every word the day before. I smiled. Morning. Across the room, my daughter-in-law was already talking to the manager. Pointing at something on a tablet. Adjusting. Correcting. Owning the space. I watched her for a moment. Not with anger. With interest. Because now I wasn't looking at family. I was studying behavior. Patterns. Confidence levels. And she was confident. That told me something very specific. They believed the transition was already working. That belief would be useful. Very useful. I stayed quiet during the morning meeting. Let them lead. Let them speak over each other. Let them decide. At one point, my younger son said, "We should standardize vendor pricing across all locations." He looked at his brother. Not at me. I nodded slightly. Good idea. He seemed surprised I agreed so easily. He shouldn't have been. Agreement is a powerful disguise. By midday, I had already made 3 mental notes. Who interrupts who defers, who assumes authority, and most importantly, who signs what, because that's where power lives. Not in opinions, in signatures. That afternoon, I left early. On purpose. No explanation. Just stood up and said, "You've got this." I saw it immediately. That small shift in the room. Relief. Not concern. Relief. They didn't want me there. And now they were getting used to it. Good. That meant they would move faster. And when people move faster than they should, they make mistakes. I drove straight to the bank. Not the main branch. A smaller one. Quieter. The kind of place where people still look you in the eye. The manager recognized me. Of course he did. I've been with that bank longer than my children have been alive. Mrs. Carter, he said, standing up. What can we do for you today? I sat down, calm, measured. I'd like to review all active business authorizations. No urgency in my voice. No emotion, just routine. He nodded, of course. As he pulled up the accounts, I watched the screen carefully. Names, access levels, linked cards, approvals, exactly what I expected, and exactly what I needed. They've been helping manage things, he said politely. Yes, I replied, they've been very helpful. He didn't hear the meaning behind that. But I did. I'd like to make a few adjustments, I added. Small ones, nothing dramatic, not yet. He made the changes without question. Because on paper, nothing had changed. My name was still the one that mattered. Always had been, always would be. When I left the bank, I didn't feel angry. I felt steady, grounded, because now I wasn't guessing anymore. I wasn't reacting to behavior. I was working with structure. And structure doesn't lie. That evening, we had dinner again. Same table, same routine. My eldest son was more animated than usual. Talking about expansion, new opportunities. Now that we're streamlining things, we can really scale, he said. That word again. I took a sip of water. You should, I said calmly. He smiled. Encouraged. Across the table, my daughter-in-law added. We've already started outlining a new management layer. Of course you have. I nodded. That makes sense. No resistance, no tension, just agreement. And that's when I saw it. The confidence, the comfort. They truly believed I was stepping back. That I didn't notice. That I didn't understand. And the more they believed that, the more they would reveal. Later that night, I sat alone again. But this time, I didn't just think. I acted. I made 2 calls. Quiet ones. One to a lawyer. One to an accountant. People who had worked with me for years. People who didn't ask unnecessary questions. I need a review, I said. Discreet. There was a pause on the other end. Then, of course, no explanations needed, because people like that understand something most don't. When someone like me calls quietly, it means the situation is already serious. I hung up and looked around the room. Everything was still, peaceful, controlled. On the surface, nothing had changed, and that was exactly how I wanted it. Because while they were getting comfortable, I was getting precise. And precision? That's what shifts everything. I didn't rush anything. That's where most people fail. They feel the shift, and they react too fast. Emotion first, strategy later. I did the opposite. I slowed everything down, even more than before. At the restaurant, I became lighter. Less involved, less present. I stopped asking questions, stopped correcting mistakes, stopped finishing their sentences, and the effect was immediate. They expanded, like people finally given space. My eldest son started staying later, taking calls in my office. I noticed the door closed more often. That was new. My daughter-in-law began introducing changes without even mentioning them to me. Menu adjustments, supplier switches, staff reshuffling, all presented later as updates. Never as discussions. Perfect. Exactly what I needed, because the more they acted independently, the clearer their structure became. And I was mapping all of it. Quietly, every night, I sat at my desk at home. Same lamp, same files, but now, new notes. Who approved what? Who initiated changes? Who followed? Patterns started forming, clear ones. My eldest son pushed decisions. My daughter-in-law shaped them. My younger son executed. And my daughters? They aligned with whoever sounded the most confident. That told me everything about internal balance. And imbalance is leverage. The lawyer called me back 2 days later. Everything looks standard, he said carefully. Standard. I almost smiled. Look deeper, I replied. Silence. Then, I understand. Of course he did. Because standard, on the surface, often hides intentional design underneath. That same afternoon, my accountant sent me a summary. Clean, organized, but one section stood out. Internal reallocations. Subtle, legal, but directional. Moving authority away from central control. Away from me, slowly, just like I had seen. I closed the file and leaned back. They weren't careless. I'll give them that. They were trying to be smart. But they made one mistake. They assumed I would stay emotional. That I would react as a mother. Not as a builder. Not as someone who understands systems better than people. And systems? They always leave traces. That evening, I decided to test something. A small test, harmless on the surface. At dinner, I said casually, "I've been thinking about stepping back from one of the locations." Silence, not shock, not concern, interest, immediate. My son leaned forward. "Which one?" Too fast. My daughter-in-law didn't speak. But I saw it. That quick look in her eyes. Calculation, opportunity. I took a sip of wine. "I'm not sure yet," I said. "Just thinking." My younger son nodded. "Makes sense. That location needs restructuring anyway." Of course it does. Because now, in their minds, I was confirming the story they already believed. That I was letting go. That I was tired. That I was ready to move aside. And the moment people believe that, they stop being careful. They start reaching. After dinner, I walked outside alone. The air was cool, quiet, and for the first time in weeks, I allowed myself a small smile. Because everything was aligning, they were accelerating, and I was ahead of them. Not by force, not by confrontation, by patience, by observation, by letting them reveal themselves fully. Most people think control is loud. It isn't. Real control is invisible until the moment it matters. And I was getting very close to that moment. They just didn't know it yet. And that was the most valuable position I could be in. They got comfortable. That's when the real mistakes started. Not big ones, not obvious, small shifts in behavior, tone, assumptions, the kind of things you only notice when you're no longer emotionally involved. By the end of that week, they weren't just making decisions. They were assigning authority, without saying it out loud. I walked into the office one afternoon and saw my eldest son sitting behind my desk. Not visiting, working, laptop open, phone on speaker. "We'll finalize that without her involvement," he said. Without her. I didn't react, just stood there for a second longer than necessary. He looked up, paused, then smiled. "Hey, Mom, just handling a few things." "Of course you are." I nodded. "Good," and walked away, because correction would have helped him. Silence helped me. Later that day, I noticed something else. Staff behavior had shifted completely. They no longer checked with me first. They went to him, or her, even when I was standing right there. That doesn't happen naturally. That gets directed, quietly, repeatedly, until it becomes normal. I didn't stop it. I let it settle, because the more visible their control became, the more invisible mine could remain. That evening, I reviewed access logs again. And there it was, clearer than before. They had started grouping decisions, creating clusters of authority, supplier approvals, staff hiring, operational spending, all routed through them, efficient, smart, but incomplete, because they were building control on top of something they didn't actually own. And that difference? That's where everything breaks. The next morning, I did something different. Not dramatic, just precise. I arrived earlier than usual. Before anyone else, walked through every room, kitchen, office, storage, quiet, still, the way it used to feel. Before all the noise, before all the layers, I stood in the center of the dining room for a moment. And remembered, every decision, every risk, every time I chose growth over comfort. They didn't see that part. They inherited the result, not the weight. And that matters, because people who don't carry the weight don't understand the structure. At exactly 8:15, I made a call. Short, direct. "It's time," I said. No explanation, none needed. On the other end, "I'll prepare everything." Good. I hung up and put the phone away. Then I sat down at my usual table, ordered coffee, and waited. One by one, they arrived. Same routine, same confidence, same quiet ownership in their movements. My daughter-in-law walked in last, paused when she saw me already there. Just for a second, then smiled. "Early today?" I nodded. Just felt like it. She studied me, briefly, then moved on. Good instincts, but not enough. The morning meeting started without me speaking. As usual, they led, discussed, assigned, moved things forward, and I let them, because today wasn't about stopping them. Today was about letting them go as far as they could. Without realizing, they had already gone too far. At one point, my eldest son said, "We should start formalizing leadership roles." There it was, out loud, finally. No hesitation now, no soft language, just direction. My younger son agreed immediately. "Yeah, it's time. Time for what? To replace me? Or to make it official? I kept my expression neutral. Calm. Interested. As if I were hearing something new. Inside, I was counting. Timing. Because moments like this, you don't interrupt. You let them fully commit. And they did. They talked about structure, titles, responsibilities, future control, all of it, without once asking me, without once checking. That was the moment. The exact moment I had been waiting for. Because once people declare control, before they actually have it, they expose everything, and I finally had everything I needed. I finished my coffee, set the cup down gently, and for the first time in weeks, I spoke, not loudly, not emotionally, just enough. That won't be necessary. The room went quiet, not confused, not yet, just still. My son looked at me. What do you mean? I met his eyes, calm, steady, and for the first time, completely clear. It's already handled. No one spoke for a second. Not a long second, just enough. Enough for the air to shift. My eldest son leaned back slightly. What do you mean, handled? Still calm, still confident, but there was something else now. A small crack. I didn't rush to fill the silence. That's the mistake people make. They explain too early. I folded my hands on the table, looked at each of them, one by one. I said quietly, there's no need to formalize anything. My daughter frowned, but we were just. I know what you were doing, I interrupted gently. No edge, no emotion, just clarity, and that's when I saw it. The first real shift, not in words, in posture. They sat differently, less certain, because now, for the first time, they weren't fully in control of the conversation. My daughter-in-law spoke next. Carefully, what exactly has been handled? Good question. Smart. She was trying to regain ground. I nodded slightly. Structure, I said. Access. Authority. Continuity. Simple words. Heavy meaning. My younger son frowned. I don't understand. We've been managing all of that. Managing, not owning. I let that word sit there. Then I said, yes, you've been managing operations. Pause. But operations aren't control. Silence again. Longer this time, because now they felt it. Not fully, but enough. My eldest son leaned forward. A little sharper now. What did you do? There it was. Finally, the right question. I met his eyes. Calm, steady. I made sure the business doesn't depend on any one person. That landed. I saw it. Confusion first, then calculation, then something closer to concern. My daughter shook her head slightly. That doesn't make sense. It already doesn't. It did, I said softly. Before. Another pause. I didn't raise my voice. Didn't need to, because now they were listening. Not talking, listening. My daughter-in-law tried again. What does that actually mean? I leaned back slightly. Relaxed. Because now, I was in control of the pace. It means, I said, decisions no longer move the way you think they do. My younger son exchanged a look with his brother. Are you saying we don't have authority? I tilted my head slightly. You have responsibility. Not the same thing. They knew it, even if they didn't want to say it yet. My eldest son exhaled slowly. You changed something, not a question, a realization. I nodded once. Yes, that was enough. The room shifted again, this time heavier, because now it wasn't theory. It was fact. My daughter's voice softened. What kind of changes? I looked at her, not as a child, not as someone I needed to protect, but as someone who needed to understand. The kind you don't see immediately. That unsettled them more than anything else I'd said. Because visible changes can be challenged. Invisible ones? They create doubt, and doubt slows people down. Exactly what I wanted. My daughter-in-law crossed her arms slightly. Defensive now. We should have been informed. I almost smiled. Should have. About what? I asked calmly. She held my gaze. About structural changes. I nodded. Why? That stopped her. Just for a second. Because there was no clean answer. Not one that didn't expose intention. My eldest son stepped in. Because we're running the business now. There it was. Out loud. Clear. I looked at him. Not angry. Not surprised. Just direct. No, I said. You're participating in it. That hit harder than anything else. I saw it in his face. That moment when confidence meets resistance. Real resistance. Not emotional. Structural. And that's when the silence changed. It wasn't confusion anymore. It was pressure. Because now they understood something important. They thought they were in control. They weren't. And they didn't know where control actually was. That's the worst position to be in. I let the moment stretch. Let them sit in it. Because this wasn't the reveal. Not yet. This was the shift. The moment where certainty disappears. And once certainty is gone, everything else becomes possible. No one reached for their phone. No one spoke. That told me everything. Because instinctively, they all wanted to check something. Accounts, access, authority. But they didn't. Not yet. Because they didn't know where to start. And that hesitation? That's where control lives. My eldest son broke the silence first. Slow, measured. What exactly did you change? Same question, different tone, less confidence now, more caution. I didn't answer immediately. I let my fingers rest on the table. Calm, still. I made adjustments, I said. Quiet ones. My daughter exhaled. That's not an answer. No, I agreed. It's not. And I left it there. Because I wasn't here to explain. I was here to reset the position. My younger son stood up halfway, then sat back down. Uncertain. You can't just change things without telling us. There it was. The assumption. I looked at him. Softly. I just did. That landed. Harder than anything else. Because now it wasn't about what I changed. It was about the fact that I could. Without them. Without permission. Without discussion. My daughter-in-law leaned forward. Voice sharper now. What about transparency? Transparency. I almost smiled. Transparency works both ways, I said quietly. And that was the first time none of them had a response. Because now we weren't talking about structure anymore. We were talking about behavior. And they knew. They all knew. I had seen everything. My eldest son ran a hand across his face. Thinking. Fast. Trying to catch up. What kind of adjustments are we talking about? He asked. Careful again. Trying to regain control of the conversation. I leaned back slightly. Relaxed. Access levels, I said. Approval paths. Decision chains. Each word landed separately, like steps. Slow. Deliberate. My daughter frowned. That doesn't change ownership. I looked at her. No, I said. It doesn't. Pause. But it changes control. That's when it hit them. Not fully, but enough. Enough to feel the ground shift under their feet. My younger son stood up again. This time he didn't sit. What does that mean for us? Us. Interesting. I held his gaze. It means, I said calmly, you should be very careful about what you assume you can do. Silence. Heavy now. Because that wasn't a threat. It was a statement. My daughter-in-law crossed her arms tighter. So what? We need your approval for everything now. I tilted my head slightly. You always did. That one stayed in the room. Longer than anything else. Because it wasn't new. It was just forgotten. My eldest son leaned forward again. Lower voice now. Controlled. What are you trying to do? I met his eyes. Direct. I'm making sure nothing can be taken from me without me deciding it. No anger. No accusation. Just truth. And that's when something finally broke. Not loudly, but clearly. The confidence. That quiet certainty they had been building for weeks. It cracked. Because now they understood one thing. They hadn't secured anything. They had just been operating inside something I allowed. And that permission? It wasn't permanent. My daughter looked at me. Different now. Not dismissive. Not casual. Careful. Why didn't you just talk to us? I held her gaze for a moment. Then said, because you already made your plan. That was it. No more pretending. No more soft language. Just the truth sitting between us. My daughter-in-law looked away first. My younger son stayed standing. Still trying to process. But my eldest son, he understood. I saw it in his eyes. That moment when everything connects. The meetings, the decisions, the confidence, and now, the realization that it was all built on something unstable. He leaned back slowly, and for the first time since this started, he didn't speak, because now he knew, whatever he thought he was controlling, was already gone. No one argued after that. Not immediately. That's how you know something real has shifted. When people stop reacting and start recalculating. My eldest son looked down at the table. Not defeated. Thinking. Fast. Trying to understand what exactly had slipped out of his hands. My daughter stayed quiet. Watching me now. Not dismissing. Not interrupting. Just watching. And my daughter-in-law? She was the only one still holding tension. Jaw tight. eyes sharp, because she was the one who pushed this forward. And now, she was the one losing ground. Finally, my eldest son spoke. Low, controlled. So what happens now? Not why, not how, what now? Good. That meant he understood. I folded my hands again. Calm. Nothing rushed. Now? I repeated. Yes. I let a small pause sit between us. Then, now everything continues. That confused them. I saw it immediately. My younger son frowned. What does that mean? It means, I said, nothing changes on the surface. They exchanged looks. Because that wasn't what they expected. They expected restriction, control, limits, but I was offering continuity. And that unsettled them more. My daughter spoke carefully. So we just keep running things? I nodded slightly. You keep doing what you've been doing. Another pause. But now you understand something important. I looked at each of them again. Slow, clear, you're not in control of it. That landed deeper this time. Because now it wasn't new information. It was confirmed reality. My daughter-in-law leaned forward. And you are? There it was. Challenge. Direct. I met her eyes. Not aggressive. Not defensive. Yes. Simple. Clean. No explanation. Because I didn't need one. My eldest son exhaled slowly. And if we don't agree with that? I tilted my head slightly. You don't have to agree. Silence. Then. But you will have to work within it. That was the line. The real one. Not emotional. Not dramatic. Structural. My younger son finally sat down. Slowly, like the weight of it had just reached him. This doesn't feel right, he said. I nodded. I'm sure it doesn't. And I meant that. Because losing control rarely feels fair. Even when you never had it to begin with. My daughter looked at me. Something softer in her voice now. Are you stepping back, or not? Good question. Finally, I leaned back in my chair. Relaxed. I didn't step down, I said. Pause. I just made sure no one could push me out. That was it. That was the truth. And it settled over the table like something final. Because now there was no misunderstanding. No illusion left. They weren't taking over anything. They were operating inside something that still belonged entirely to me. My daughter-in-law leaned back. Arms uncrossing slightly. Not relaxed. But adjusting. Recalculating. Because now she had to think differently. My eldest son nodded once. Slow. I see. And I knew he did. At least more than the others. Because he understood systems, power, structure, and he could feel it now. The difference between managing something and actually controlling it. No one spoke after that. Not for a while. We just sat there. The same table, the same room, but everything was different. Because now, they knew, they weren't helping me, they were replacing me, and I had already made sure. That wasn't possible. I stood up first. Calm, steady. Finish your meeting, I said. And walked away. No rush. No need. Because the conversation was over. And for the first time since this started, they weren't ahead of me anymore. They were trying to catch up. The next few days were the quietest we'd had in months. No one argued. No one apologized either. That told me everything. Apologies come from regret. Silence like theirs comes from shock. At the restaurants, everything kept moving. Orders, staff, deliveries. The business didn't care about family tension. It kept working. That's what they never understood. A business isn't emotion, it's structure. And I built mine to survive everything. By Monday, my eldest son walked in like nothing had happened. Confident, controlled, but I know him. I know when confidence is real. And when it's worn like armor. Morning, Mom, he said. Morning. That Chicago vendor issue is resolved. I know. He paused. Because now, information didn't go through him anymore. Not the way he thought. My daughter came later with reports. Careful tone. Professional. Thought you'd want to see this. Want. Interesting word. I skimmed it. Thank you. She didn't leave. You could have warned us, she said. I looked up. You were making plans for me. Why would I warn you? She didn't argue. Just nodded slightly. By midweek, even the staff felt it. My children spoke differently around me. Less control. More caution. Employees always sense power first. My daughter-in-law came into my office that afternoon. No knock. Controlled posture. I think we should clarify expectations. All right. She hesitated. You've made things unclear. No, I said. I made them accurate. She tightened. We've been doing the work. Yes. Then we need to know where we stand. I gestured to the chair. Sit. She did. Carefully. You stand where you always stood, I said. Near the business, not above it. That's not fair. Fairness has nothing to do with ownership. That hit. She didn't expect it. You weren't helping me, I added. Silence. You were replacing me. She looked away. That's not how I saw it. That's how you justified it. That one landed. She stood. Professional again. We'll continue operations. Yes, you will. That evening, my eldest son asked to talk. We sat alone. No staff. No audience. Just truth. I didn't think of it that way, he said. I know. We thought you were slowing down. I was watching. He nodded slowly. I see that now. Then he asked, were you ever going to step back? Yes. That surprised him. I would have done it properly. With structure. With respect. He looked down. We thought waiting would make it harder. It got harder because you acted like I was already gone. Silence. I didn't mean to make you feel disposable. I looked at him. You didn't make me feel that way. You showed me you were ready to use me that way. That stayed with him. I don't know how to fix this, he said. This isn't a scheduling problem, I replied. It's a character problem. He didn't argue. After he left, I sat alone, looking at everything I built. And I understood something clearly. The real shift wasn't what I changed. It was that I saw them clearly. And once that happens, they can't pretend anymore. They weren't helping me. They were replacing me. And now, they knew I knew. The next morning felt different. Not louder, quieter, but real. They didn't try to take over again. They didn't pretend nothing happened. They adjusted, carefully, respectfully. Finally, I sat at my usual table, coffee in front of me, watching them move through the space. Not as owners, not as replacements, as participants. And for the first time in weeks, it felt right. Not perfect, but honest. Because here's the truth no one wants to admit. You don't lose your place in a family business in one moment. You lose it slowly, and if you stay silent too long, someone else will decide where you belong. I didn't fight them. I didn't argue. I didn't beg. I just made sure one thing stayed true. Nothing leaves my hands, unless I choose to let it go. Tell me honestly, would you have stayed quiet like I did? Or would you have stopped them sooner?
Your voice matters here. Share your story below. Subscribe for more emotional family stories. Have you ever lived through something similar? Share in the comments. Your voice matters here.